All right, lots of injuries yesterday from the NFL Sunday. Should be a way for some teams to get back in it fantasy wise. Probably hurt some teams yesterday. The loss of Dalvin Cook was a big deal. Chris Carson looks like he got a torn ACL or just broken leg last night late against the Colts. So he's done. He's a guy that looked like he was going to be a top waiver wire addition throughout the year, and he got hurt last night. So some other guys, let's talk about this next week. Some guys that came out, showed some guys that we're going to have to watch for this next week to see how we feel going forward with them. So let's start out with quarterbacks. Deshaun Watson looked great. Magic Man looked great again. Jared Goff looked great again. Some guys I talked about last week. We can go ahead and keep the train rolling with them. Both teams that have good defenses. Both teams that, at this point in the year, records are pretty deceiving. You got to really think about who did these teams beat. But Jared Goff and the Rams, before the Cowboys game, you're like, they hadn't really played anybody. We'll see how he does against the Cowboys. And he passed with flying colors. Gurley looked good. Sammy Watkins didn't have a great game, but Goff got it done. If this is a game Goff could have fucked up and Goff could have had a shit game, this could have been it. Had a real good game, and not saying that the Cowboys are the best teams, but the Cowboys jumped on them early. They're up 17-6, and they were able to withstand it. Kicked field goals all day. Greg the Leg, I think he scored 23 against me in a fantasy league. He killed me. Some other guys on the list, Simeon. Simeon had a tough week, but he was all right. And then Carson Wentz. Carson Wentz was strong again. He's been a consistent player all year if you're looking for a quarterback. Okay, so let's talk about some running backs. Alvin Kamara might be a guy that's gone, but Alvin Kamara is a guy that, to me, he kind of was under the radar. I really liked him as a prospect ahead of this year out of Tennessee. Really liked him, was really eager to see where he went. Was kind of disappointed because I thought he'd get stuck behind Peterson, he'd get stuck behind Ingram. But what we've seen in the first couple weeks of the season is Peterson is not the guy for the Saints. He doesn't touch the ball very often at all. Alvin Kamara is a guy that's probably gone in most leagues, but he's a guy that if he's there, I would pick him up needing a running back. Latavius Murray with the injury to Dalvin Cook looks like he's going to be out for the year. I really like Latavius Murray. If Latavius Murray is a guy that everybody probably drafted, but he's a guy that after we saw the first couple weeks how the season went, there's some guys that might have dropped him, and this is an opportunity for you to go and get him. And he's going to be a tough guy to get. He's going to be one of the top guys on the list because he's the most well-known. Knowing that Cook went down and knowing that Murray, it was the most RB1 type back on this list of last year. He has struggled, but he also hasn't got a lot of playing time. This is going to be his chance. Another guy that you're going to want to watch out for too is Jerick McKinnon. McKinnon did have a fumble on Sunday, so that might hurt, this next week. But Murray had a fumble week 1. I think they'll definitely be going with both of these guys. It's going to be hard to decide which guy to go with, but I'm going to go with Latavius Murray. Got a big upside, I feel like. Some other guys that played good this week, Wendell Smallwood, he had a couple of, I think he might have had a TD. He had some good gains, and a pretty good back, but it's just tough to really be sold on Smallwood with the fact that Corey Clements is getting, I think he got 10 carries for 30 yards in the game. Smallwood is more that Sproles back. He's going to be out of the backfield and stuff like that. And then they have Blunt, and Blunt is going to definitely get a good amount of carries. Wayne Gallman had a really good game for the Giants. The Giants have been looking for their back all year. Paul Perkins was touted as the guy that could have been a real good fantasy guy for the Giants, and he has not panned out. He doesn't hit the hole hard. Wayne Gallman was playing really well. Wayne Gallman's a guy I might add you might take a chance on. Not a guy that you're going to want to just start this week, but he's a guy that you can sit on your bench and wait and see how he develops. But you got to get him early because if he has another good week next week, he's going to be gone. Alex Collins, he did have a fumble on Sunday, but he's had 82 yards 2 games in a row. I like what I've seen out of Alex Collins. He got picked up by the Ravens. The only thing with the Ravens is they've got so many backs. You really can't be sold on Alex Collins long term. This is a guy that you can pick up for a couple of weeks and see how it goes. Some other guys, Duke Johnson. Duke Johnson's played very well this year he's a backup running back. Isaiah Crowell has been absolutely terrible. Duke Johnson's a guy, if you got a spot on your bench, you might pick him up, see if he pans out. He's done good. He's got a couple of touchdowns each of the weeks. Isaiah Crowell has not looked good, so we'll see what happens with that going forward. Duke Johnson may be gone in most leagues, but he's a guy that's kind of been on the radar as of lately. Andre Ellington is new to my list. One thing that I noticed about Andre Ellington, if you play in the NFL.com league, I don't know if this is the same for the NFL or the ESPN leagues, but Andre Ellington, I think they moved him out to wide receiver. Now, they might have moved him back whenever they lost Johnson, but Andre Ellington did catch a touchdown pass. He's caught about 19 passes on the year. He's only rushed for 51 yards, but he's labeled as a running back. He's a guy you could pick up, put at your running back position. Now, I don't know how much you'd like to do this, but he's probably going to play a lot of wide receiver more. Not that you would want to have a running back at your wide receiver role, but if you need a flex, Andre Ellington could be a good pickup. I'm not completely sold on that. There's other guys on this list that I like better than Andre Ellington, but he's going to be on my list. Eddie Lacy may become a starter again with the loss of Chris Carson. But one thing I will say, I mean, obviously J.D. McKissick probably won't take over those RB1 role for the Seahawks, but J.D. McKissick had 2 TDs. He had a rushing TD and a passing TD. Nobody probably started him. He got activated, hours before the game when Prosite was down with an ankle injury. Prosite's another guy you could look at. He had a pretty good year, a pretty good couple of games last year. I picked him up and he got hurt last year. Chris Ivory, Mike Tolbert, Jamal Charles, these 3 guys are all backups that, sometimes could steal a touchdown from the starter. Watch these guys. Aaron Jones is the running back for the Packers right now with the injuries to Montgomery and to Williams. He did have a TD at 49 yards. Watch him. Elijah McGuire, he's kind of the third string backup type for the Jets. He did have a TD. He played a good amount with Bilal Powell with Forte out. And then Jalen Richard, I always have him on this list, and then Deontay Foreman, some other running backs. Those are some lower end running backs that you would add, and you would just kind of sit and wait if you had a roster spot if you want to add one of those guys. Some tight ends, I don't as much as Cameron Bray is not the most exciting guy, and he's not got a huge upside fantasy wise. He's usually a pretty good guy. I've had a lot of issues with tight ends this year. If you don't have Gronk. And that's about it. If you don't have Gronk, Olsen's out. Kelsey's had a pretty good year. So Kelsey and Gronk have been your top guys. I'm going to throw Zach Ertz in there. Zach Ertz has been very consistent. But if you're looking for a tight end, Cameron Brake might be that guy. Charles Clay's been good. Evan Ingram has consistently created good chemistry with Eli Manning. I like the chemistry that I see between them two. Zach Miller's probably the best talented tight end on this list. Austin Hooper, he had an all right week with the injuries to Julio and Sanu. Ed Dixon had an all right week. Jesse James has not been what he was since week 1. Tyler Kroft, who's filling in for Tyler Eifert, had 2 TDs, 6 catches, 68 yards. Had a real good game. You know how Andy Dalton loves his little security blanket tight end, so that's a guy you might watch out for. Depending on who the Bengals are playing in the next couple weeks, Benjamin Watson, Hunter Henry, Luke Wilson, Hunter Henry, and AJ Derby are some lower end guys that you probably wouldn't want to start every week, but spot starts. They all had TDs this week, so I put them on my list. Defenses, if you hadn't picked up the Lions defense and they're there, they're making me look good. They look really good, underrated. They play good every week. Bills defense is looking really good. That's another defense that I really like. Played good against the Falcons this last Sunday. Redskins, we'll see how they play tonight against the Chiefs. They've been positive in their first 3 games. And then the Eagles have looked pretty good also, pretty solid. They hadn't scored a whole lot of points for their offense or nothing, but they hadn't been hurt that bad. And then Falcons and Ravens. Ravens, haven't really played good the last 2 weeks, but Ravens is a team I added on this just because they have scored 50 points on the year defensively. They are probably one of the leading defensive teams other than these last 2 weeks that they've had. I will say they played the Browns and they played the Bengals those 2 weeks, so that's something else to be aware of. And then Falcons, I've also liked the Falcons defense, and they've had trouble this year at times, but a lot of it has been because Matt Ryan's pick sixes. He's gave up a couple pick sixes the last 2 weeks. Wide receivers, I said to pick up Funches last week. Funches had 2 TDs this last week. Cooper Kupp had a TD this week. And then Will Fuller is my top guy of the week to add at wide receiver. He's back. He's been injured. He's not a guy that you wanted to add beforehand because you really didn't know how he'd turn out, but he had 2 TDs this week. He looks like he could be a real speedy, break it deep guy. I picked him up at the first of the year last year after he had a good week 1. But he's a guy. J.J. Nelson's probably picked up. Paul Richardson's probably picked up. Those are some guys to watch. Seth Roberts, Amari Cooper's having a really tough year. Seth Roberts is a guy I'm going to continue to put on this list. Jermaine Curse had a tough week. Taylor Gabriel, depending on if Sanu or if I don't think Julio Jones is going to be hurt, but if Sanu's hurt for any long-term, Gabriel should be a guy you should pick up. Rashard Higgins has had a tough week since he had a good game against the Colts. Robert Woods had another pretty good game. Terrence Williams struggled a bit, but was all right. Brandon Coleman, he's going to kind of go down my list a little bit with the return of Willie Snead. And then let's talk about Adam Humphries. Adam Humphries had another good week. Tyler Lockett. Jaron Brown and Bryce Butler are some two guys that are really coming up my list. Bryce Butler's had 2 good weeks in a row. Jaron Brown's had 2 good weeks in a row. Some guys that I were really high on that I'm kind of lowering my take on is Zay Jones, Kenny Golladay. These rookies hadn't done as much the last couple of weeks. And Juju Smith-Schuster, I want to add him. He's had 2 touchdowns in the last 2 weeks. Kendall Wright had a TD last week. So that's what I'm going to go with at wide receivers. I think you should pick up Funches this week, and I think you should pick up Will Fuller for sure if you can. Don't be afraid of Cooper Kupp if he's available in leagues. And then kicker-wise, I talked about Greg DeLeg, who had 23 this week, Greg Zuerlein. And, Jake Elliott's played really good for the Eagles so far. He hit the 61-yarder last week. He had a good amount of points. This week, Suckup really struggled, and Prater really struggled. Their offenses were only able to score 14 points, but I like these 2 kickers still. Phil Dawson had a good game, made all his field goals, won the game for the Cardinals. And then Chris Boswell, Giorgio Trevecchi, and then I added Cameron Fairbairn. He's the Texans kicker. He's had 16 and 18 respectively the last 2 weeks. Pretty good. If the Texans continue to score the points the way they have been, Fairbairn will be a good kicker.